Okay, so today we'll be working with those values that are either positive or negative within the brackets, and we will see what do we have to do first. Firstly, let's just make a note to remind ourselves that Bodmas comes first. Bodmas. So when we work with Bodmas, we work with our brackets, and brackets are now not necessarily indicated by a multiplication sign, but Bodmas also tells us brackets that are next to each other indicate multiplication, and any term separated by these brackets with brackets right next to each other would mean multiplication comes first. Okay, then we have our brackets, multiplication, division, then addition and subtraction from the left-hand side to our right-hand side. Very important to follow it in that order. Okay, so I'm just going to choose a couple here, especially with fractions. We tend to get confused because there's so many signs. So let's look at number 1. Calculate. Number 1, we'll start by first looking at the way we lay it out. So we want to help our brain and our eyes to see what comes first. And we have a negative 3 to the power of 2 over 9, and then a minus, and then in the bracket a negative 9, and then we have a minus square root of 121. A lot of things happening here. Let's just jot down that rule here in the corner. When we have negative 1 to the power of an even value, we get a positive answer. But when we have negative 1 to the power of an odd value, our final answer is negative. Okay, so let's start. We've got a negative 3 to the power of 2, which is equivalent to saying negative 3 times negative 3. And a negative times a negative is a positive. So I'm going to first simplify that. Negative 3 to the power of 2 gives me a 9 over 9. Right. Now I'm going to highlight my next step, which is where I see a sign next to a sign. When I have a sign next to a sign, it means product. So I will need to see what is that negative times that negative. And I am allowed to go ahead and multiply it into that bracket because I only have one term within the bracket, which now gives me a positive 9. Then I keep this negative here. This negative is separating the 9 from the next term, but I perform my simplifying of the square root of 121, which we should know is 11. So let's just quickly refer to that. If we say 11 to the power of 2, we get 121. Therefore, the square root, little invisible 2, of 121 gives me the base that I would have multiplied by itself to give 121. Right, now I can continue, and I always want to focus on simplifying but also sticking to Bodmas. And I see I've got a 9 divided by 9, which gives me 1 plus the 9 minus 11. Now we are not performing any rules with regards to a minus times a minus is a plus, or plus times a minus is a negative. When we are at this step, we are moving on our number line. So we are jumping around. We have a positive 1. We add another 9, which means we move to the right-hand side. And then we subtract 11, which means we move to the left-hand side. So that's why this concept of following our addition and subtraction from left to right is so important. It's because if we move from left to right, we can actually see exactly what's happening. If I say 1 plus 9, I get 10 minus the 11. So this is just an extra step right here. Then I'll see, okay, I have 10, but I'm subtracting 11, which gives me a final answer of minus 1. Okay, right, so a lot of different things happening with each step, but if we section it off and do it one by one, we'll be fine. Right, let's look at that number 2. Okay, so number 2 gives me a negative 3 times a negative 2 over 3 plus. And then I have negative 2 to the power of 3 over negative 1 to the power of 2. Okay, so I can see that with that first term, I have one term, but I have product in the numerator. So I will have to sort out my sign. This is a minus times a minus. So there I get negative times a negative is a positive. You can write a little positive for now. And my 3 times 2 gives me 6 over 3. Okay, great. I'm done with that. Plus, so I'm not losing signs. I don't want to get rid of things. I want to still keep it. But what I'm doing now is I'm looking at what is going on there. Okay, great. That's a negative something to the power of an odd value. What does my rule say? A negative something to the power of an odd value will always give me a negative answer. So let's jot that down. We've got negative 2 to the power of 1 is equal to negative 2. Negative 2 to the power of 2 will be equal to a positive 4, but negative 2 to the power of 3 will give me a negative 8. It's not 6, it's negative 8. Right, so let's put our division sign down because I have a fraction here and I'm just actually simplifying the top first, the numerator, which gives me my negative 8. Okay, so I'm keeping that little negative right here. I'll sort out my sign in the next step. Then I look at my denominator and I see, okay, I have a negative 1 to the power of a even value. That's going to become a positive 1. So I'll write my little positive there. But what we have here is we still have a sign next to a sign. This is so, so important. We can't just move on here. This is super, super important. We have to sort that out in our next step. So let's go further now. I can do this one. So note how with every step I am writing the simplified answer underneath what I have in my next step. I write it in line with what that answer will be if it's simplified further. So 6 divided by 3 is 2. I still keep my plus, and whatever I get here, I'm just going to put it in a bracket because I'm not too sure about that sign. But I'm keeping the original positive sign. And what I see here is a negative 8 divided by a positive 1, which gives me, it's just 8 over 1, but it's negative. And now I can sort out in my next step what exactly is happening there. I have 2 minus 8. Final answer, negative 8 is really more negative than 2. So I end up having a negative 6. Okay. Right, so that's really the way that we need to work very slowly, actually. Slow it down, check the signs, term by term, so that we don't make any mistakes. Okay, I'm going to now do number 5. So it looks a little bit tricky, but we'll sort it out. So let's jot down number 5 right here. It's a bracket negative 12 times positive 3 over. And then I have a negative 2 in the denominator times a negative 3. And then I have a separate minus 2. And then I have a bracket next to it with a negative 3 squared. Sure. Okay, it looks quite daunting, but let's break it up into steps. We're going to try to figure out what is going on here first. Then we look at our denominator. Then we sort out what I have left here, and this becomes one term, something we need to start looking at for our next chapter. It's called a monomial because times and division create one term. Okay, so let's take it back here. Check our sign. We have a negative times a positive, and I'm left with a negative. 12 times 3 is 36. So negative 36 divided by. In my denominator, I have a negative times a negative gives me a positive, and 2 times 3 gives me 6. Right, I'm done there. Let me now look at what's going on here. I have a rule in maths that whenever I have a bracket that is raised to a power, that bracket takes priority, and that is why Bodmas states what it does. Bodmas reminds us of doing brackets first. And this is in fact a bracket. That's bracket to the power of 1, bracket to the power of 1, where I've multiplied minus 3. I have done it twice though. Therefore, this takes priority, and this minus 2 will remain until I have simplified that bracket. So, minus 2 will remain, and let me simplify my minus 3 squared. That gives me a positive 9. Now, what I have here is simply minus 2 times 9. So let's write that down in our next step. And again, a negative divided by a positive is a negative. 36 divided by 6, we must do this in the correct order, gives me 6, so it's a negative 6. And then I have minus 2 times. A minus 2 times positive 9 gives me minus 18. And watch out, we are not multiplying in this step. We are merely becoming more negative. This is such a huge confusion when we have this step. Students make a lot of mistakes here. So we are just getting more negative. So in fact, you are allowed to say the 6 and the 18, the absolute value there, together gives us 24, but the negative sign is still there because we have moved to the left-hand side. We have become more negative. Therefore, the negative 24 is in fact more negative than what I was at negative 6. Right, so our final answer is negative 24.